I 100% did not think that Khwaja Asif was going to admit to me as the defense minister of Pakistan that the state of Pakistan has used terrorism as part of their policy.
I think that if the world doesn't sit up and take notice of everything that's happening in Pakistan, it's a matter of time before we see another global terror attack at the scale of everything that happened in 2001. Terror is the enemy of humanity, not just the enemy of India.
Barack Obama and the United States, in the dead of night, they sent Navy SEALs to the country to take out Osama bin Laden and didn't inform Pakistan, tells you everything about what conversations were being had behind closed doors. If they didn't understand it then, I don't think they can understand it now. In Karachi, I have seen with my own eyes the most extreme forms of indoctrination of young people and how they prosecute what they're doing.
I noticed that even on Pierce's show, he positioned America like it was the big brother. But the truth is, there was nothing that President Trump said that affected this situation.
When President Trump said, there is a ceasefire, both sides have spoken, India would have felt angry. And I don't want to speak on behalf of India, but my understanding and reading is that they are a great power. They don't want other great powers tangled up. And Pakistan feels, well, we are a weaker nation, we're a smaller nation, therefore we want China tangled up here. We want the United States tangled up.
Yalda Hakim is a lead world news presenter on Sky News. She's become extremely popular in India over the last 3 to 4 weeks because she's one of the rare global news reporters who's spoken about the India-Pakistan conflict. She interviewed the defense minister of Pakistan, Khwaja Asif. That clip went viral in India. My intention with bringing her on TRS is to ask her the questions that India has with respect to global media. But this whole episode is an attempt to take India's voice out to the globe as well. Without further ado, this is a detailed conversation on geopolitics with a focus on everything that's happening between India and Pakistan as we speak. Hope you gain a lot of value from this episode. Yalda Hakim, welcome to the Ranveer Show. I have to begin by saying thank you on behalf of our whole country.
Thank you, Ranveer. Thank you. Honestly, I've been getting so many wonderful sort of remarks and comments and really a lot of warmth from India. But I genuinely just felt I was doing my job.
I think the way Indians perceive it, you were being very objective. You were just presenting facts and figures as every world journalist should.
Thank you. And honestly, I think, one of the things about being a journalist and I spent over a decade at the BBC, I'm at Sky now, the values very much remain the same. And also, I have almost 2 decades of experience in the field, certainly in the region, in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. I've worked across the globe in places like Ukraine and North Africa, the Arab world. And I'm currently in Doha, in Qatar, following President Trump's trip. So I think, you draw on a sort of experience and understanding of these regions as well.
Okay. We have to kind of begin by speaking about the India-Pakistan situation from your eyes as of now. You've covered it right from the start. Your interview with Khwaja Asif, the Pakistan defense minister, went viral all over India, honestly. It's become a massive part of conversations here. So I would love to hear about the whole experience from your perspective. And I'd love for you to highlight the Khwaja Asif interview as well.
So Ranveer, as things were simmering, if I go back to Pahalgam, the attack in Kashmir, I really feel as though newsrooms around the world, certainly in the Western world, don't quite understand why Kashmir is a flashpoint, why it is one of the most militarized zones on the planet. So when the attack happened, it was sort of a story that appeared and broke on my show. So I do a 9 o'clock in the UK evening foreign affairs show. It broke and our India correspondent quickly put something together to highlight that it had happened. And it sat somewhere within the bulletin. And immediately when I saw it, I was like, wait a second, this is a major terrorist attack. And, 26 people have died, tourists, innocent civilians. So we should be exploring this a little bit more. And again, because our focus and attention always is on, what President Trump is doing and what is going on politically in our part of the world, it was kind of dipping in and out of conversation in our newsrooms, but wasn't dominating any kind of conversation. And the newsrooms, like all newsrooms, moved on quite quickly. But because I understand the intricacies, because I followed the issues around terrorism in India, terrorism in Pakistan, as I said, for 15 plus years of my career, I was really keen to continue to highlight it. So 3 days after the Pahalgam attack, one of my producers said to me, "Oh, we might have the defense minister of Pakistan. Would you be interested in speaking to him?" And I said, "Absolutely. Let's get him on. Let's talk to him." And India was really ratcheting up the rhetoric. India was angry. India had promised to retaliate. India immediately pointed the finger of blame on Pakistan. And a lot of people couldn't understand why. Why is the state of Pakistan being blamed for a terrorist attack that terrorists launched in Indian-administered Kashmir? They couldn't join the dots. So when initially the defense minister cancelled the interview because they said they were holding a National Security Council meeting and the top cabinet ministers in Pakistan were meeting to discuss how India was reacting to the terrorist attack. So they cancelled it. The next day, they said, actually, we'll do it tonight. And again, I sort of thought, this is brave. This is interesting. Why is Pakistan wanting to come out and talk about this? Because I understood what was going on. And I guess for the longest time, Pakistani officials feel that accusations, if a journalist is somewhat aware about the terrorism connection between the ISI and these terrorist groups, they might raise it, and then Pakistan denies, and then everyone moves on. So I prepared myself. I was really thinking about the interview. Which angles can I come into? And I 100% did not think that Khwaja Asif was going to admit to me on air as the current serving defense minister of Pakistan that the state of Pakistan has used terrorism as part of their policy, as part of their statecraft. Of course, there is murkiness everywhere. All states use proxies on some level, but officials always come out and they deny that they're doing it. They say that these are groups that have issues with governments. They launch these attacks. It has nothing to do with us. So when I sat across, or we patched up with Khwaja Asif, and I began asking the questions, and I said to him, India's pointing the finger of blame, and he said, I don't know why they're blaming us. This is India's problem. We condemn this terrorist attack, but it's got nothing to do with us. And I thought, I'm going to obviously ask the question that you do admit, though, that you have had a history. Pakistan has had a history of state sponsoring of terrorism to this day. Anyone who is following Pakistan, anyone who is following the history of Pakistan understands this. And in the past, Pakistani officials have, when they have stepped down from their posts, they have admitted this. Whether it is the former ISI chief, General Durrani, whether it's Pervez Musharraf, whether it's Benazir Bhutto, when they step down, yeah, they talk about it. Yeah, we used it. It's part of our statecraft. I did not think the serving defense minister of Pakistan would say, yes, this is what we do. This is what we have. This is why we use it. And it's not just us. We're doing the dirty work of you, the West.
What did you make of it the moment he said that? Like, what was your first thought as a journalist who's been around for a while? You understand how the world of geopolitics works. So I'd love to know about your mind in that situation.
I realized immediately that it was extraordinary. And I thought maybe he didn't quite process what I was saying. Maybe I misunderstood him. So I wanted clarity. And I pushed him again. Initially, a lot of people have sort of replayed the interview and captured my initial reaction in that moment, because I did jolt. I sort of, I sort of couldn't believe what I was hearing, that he was saying, well, we did the dirty work of the West, and yes, we have these proxies and they exist, and this is how it is. So I did jolt, and I said, well, is that your justification? Is this, you're justifying now that Pakistan has this connection with terrorist groups because we're going back to the Mujahideen, the CIA, and the dirty work of then. So it's now just part of what Pakistan does. And he said, no, this is the reason why you're saying this to me. And he again, for the interview went for about 18 minutes, and he didn't back down at any point. He made it clear to me that he understood what I was saying. He was going to say what he was going to say, and that is that Pakistan has had the longest history, and what has been the underbelly and the so-called deep state of Pakistan and how they operate.
Yeah. Considering that this conflict has gone on for the last couple of weeks, my question to you is more from a global perspective. Do you think the world understands exactly what's happening in the subcontinent at this point? And do they also kind of remember that Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan? And is that a thought bubble for the rest of the world?
So, like I said, first of all, I think there's a lack of understanding, and the lack of understanding comes from a lack of access. And the lack of access comes because India, their policy is, why should we justify ourselves to the world? We are a great power. We are a superpower in not just the region, but globally. We have had this bipartisan relationship with the United States for 25 years. We are, a power in the region that the United States wants to partner with to counter China, for example. But I think what was quite extraordinary when we saw President Trump put out that statement on Truth Social and said, there is a ceasefire, both sides have spoken, and now I think that they should make a deal on Kashmir. That is something that India would have, felt angry, because they're feeling, and I don't want to speak on behalf of India, but my understanding and reading is that we are not on equal footings. We are a great power. Pakistan is a much weaker power. We don't want other great powers tangled up in our backyard. We want to deal with our issues ourselves. And Pakistan feels, well, we are a weaker nation, we're a smaller nation, therefore we want other great powers. We want China tangled up here. We want the United States tangled up, and so this sort of complexity isn't fully grasped, I don't think, by the US president, who came out and said that. I don't think Western audiences fully understand. And for me, why I believe it matters is because when a state is a state sponsor of terrorism and was on a grey list, and Osama bin Laden was discovered there, if the West doesn't hold the state accountable, and when Osama bin Laden in 2012 was discovered just a stone throw away from a military headquarters and base, the CIA director at the time said either Pakistan was complicit or it was incompetent. And at the time, the ISI pleaded incompetence. They would rather say we didn't know that he was right there than say, yes, sure, we were aware and we let him stay there and we harbored him and we backed him. And the fact that at that point in time, Barack Obama and the United States didn't hold Pakistan accountable. In the dead of night, they sent Navy SEALs to the country to take out Osama bin Laden and didn't inform their ally Pakistan and their partner Pakistan in the war on terror that we're doing this, because they were so worried that the operation would fall apart, that somehow Osama bin Laden would be tipped off and that he wouldn't be there when the Navy SEALs got there. Tells you everything about what conversations were being had behind closed doors. If they didn't understand it then, the role of the ISI, and they still continue to give them billions of dollars, I don't think they can understand it now.
Yeah, some key points I wish to bring up. Again, I think that if the world doesn't sit up and take notice of everything that's happening in Pakistan, it's a matter of time before we see another global terror attack at the scale of everything that happened in 2001 and the early 2000s. It has become a terror hub for the world. It's just that in India, we know about the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, because the terrorist attacks are targeted towards us. But the nature of terrorism is such that eventually it's not going to be limited to one target country. It has the potential to spread all across the globe. And India's main narrative to the world is, hey, we are a GDP that's 11 times the size of Pakistan because we're focused on our own economy, we're focused on job creation, we're focused on building businesses. We don't want a war, but we will retaliate. That's the narrative that India wants to tell the world, that we don't want to be the aggressors here. We're simply retaliating, but we're hoping that the world listens, not just for our sake, but for their own sake as well. Terror is the enemy of humanity, not just the enemy of India.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think the nature of Indian media from the Western perspective, when they look out, there is a lot of like breaking news headlines, and there's a lot of flashy headlines that I think is different to the way in which, and that's the style of Indian journalism and Indian media. But I do think that it's really important to, in a thoughtful way, in an impartial way, tell the story of your country and your understanding of its role in geopolitics, in the region, in the wider international community, and why India matters for Western capitals around the world. I mean, you look at the top CEOs in the United States, they're all Indian nationals. They're all have a connection to India. They all were either born in India or, of Indian background and heritage. So I do think it's important that that connection is made with the West, the understanding of India's role in the world. And to your point that, India's objective is not necessarily to be at war. India's objective is to export talent to the world and retain talent so that it can become, this hub of technology and growth in the region.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that you mentioned about President Trump saying that he was responsible for the ceasefire was met with a lot of backlash in India, especially mainly because Pakistan broke the ceasefire an hour after President Trump's announcement, and we also kind of feel that the the USA didn't have any role in this whole conflict. Uh, I know that Pakistan was supported by China. So you would assume that because America and China are currently in the middle of what I believe is like Cold War Part 2, you would assume that America would have helped India, but there was no help given to us. This is one of the other narratives that the world should know, because I noticed that even on Pierce's show, he positioned America like it was the big brother in this whole situation. But the truth is, there was nothing that President Trump said that affected this situation.
I guess, we know that President Trump operates in a transactional manner. He operates in the kind of art of the deal foreign policy. So he saw this as two equals fighting over a territory and come up with the solution. I'll help you, was his response, without fully grasping and understanding the history, the background, the nature of this conflict. And it's not just about Kashmir being a flashpoint, but at whether it's the Indian Parliament being attacked, whether it's the Mumbai terror attacks, whether it's various other military installations being targeted and attacked, and then civilians being killed in Pahalgam. There is a kind of a lack of understanding, or frankly, attention on this situation at all from the Western capitals. And so I think that's where it's come from. And unfortunately, in the art of the deal foreign policy approach, you do end up screwing over your friends. And while Delhi and Washington are friends, and Washington sees Delhi as a reliable partner, perhaps, in the region and for itself, and to counter China in this rivalry, at the end of the day, Donald Trump is thinking, I need this situation to be resolved. They're two nuclear armed nations. I don't need another war blowing up. I'm going to tell them both to stop. And I think that was the approach. And perhaps India then at that point is thinking, A, this isn't your war, and B, we can handle it ourselves here. And C, why are you putting us on equal footings was my take on how India responded.
Yeah, I think you've got it fairly right.
And I guess what I would say is that the whole idea of India, a nation of 1.4 billion people, again, it goes back to the point that it is a massive democracy, the oldest democracy, the biggest democracy on the planet. And that is perhaps what people don't fully grasp and understand. There are election cycles, and we're always in awe of, oh, wow, look at the way India has conducted their elections in terms of like 1.4 billion people going to the polls from all across the country. And those are the moments we tap into India and sort of think, oh, this is quite extraordinary what it's done. But I guess it's how you present yourself to the international community, its relevance in geopolitics, and the opening up of access to officials. Again, I sort of talked about the fact that whatever Pakistani officials were thinking about the interviews that I was conducting, they were still coming back every other day and wanting to talk about their side of the situation, whether it was the interior minister, whether it was the high commissioner in the UK, whether it was the defense minister. They were Bilawal Bhutto. They were accessible, available every single day of the conflict for us to be able to talk about their position, whether they liked the line of questioning or not. They took it, on the chin, and they presented their side of the story to the world.
That's what you need from Indian officials. You need more people to come up and talk to global media.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I remember when the Congress Party was in power, and Manmohan Singh hadn't given an interview in years, or a press conference. It's sort of, as a democracy, the media is the fourth estate, and it's really important to hear from officials who are not afraid to come out and talk about their position globally on the international stage, and to be able to take questions from journalists. I think that is really important to do. And we couldn't believe the radio silence, actually, from the Indian side. I was doing interview after interview after interview, and we were, after a while, saying, where are the Indian officials? Who do I contact to get them to tell us what is happening on the other side?
I think post this whole situation and the way you covered it and the objective manner in which you covered it, I think that won you a lot of fans and admirers in our country as well. So there's a lot of questions that our people have for Yalda, the human being, and not Yalda Hakim. So I would love to know a bit of your story at least. I mean, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was born in Kabul, and my father was studying architecture in what was Czechoslovakia at the time. And he returned to the country, and I was born. And he didn't want to stay in a country that had been destabilized by the Soviet occupation, and he didn't want to serve in the military. So they decided to leave the country. And myself and my two older brother and sister, alongside my mother, left in the sort of dead of night from Afghanistan into Pakistan. They moved, traveled by horseback and on foot through people smugglers into Pakistan, evading the Mujahideen, who were asking my parents questions along the way about what they were doing, why they were leaving the country, evading aerial bombardment by the Soviet-backed government. And they fled into Pakistan, where my mother, who is a midwife, she worked alongside an Austrian NGO in the Swat Valley. And my father set up an architectural firm in Islamabad. They stayed there for 2 years, and my father knew an architect in Australia, who he wrote to and said, I've got a young family and I'd like to leave the country. And so they sponsored my family to Australia. And then my family went to Australia, and that's where I grew up. From the age of about 3.5, I grew up in Sydney. And then I was working as a journalist, presenting a program on Australian television. And the head of the BBC saw my work, hired me. I moved to London, and where I worked for 11 or 12 years. And then I was hired by by Sky to lead this foreign affairs program every evening, and then I travel. I'm on the road. I cover big, massive events for the network. When I was starting off my career as a journalist, I first came to India, and I traveled to Gujarat, to Ahmedabad, convinced my parents that the network had sent me, but they hadn't. And I filmed a story where Western women were using Indian wombs as surrogates to have babies. And then I went back to Delhi and I rang my mum and dad and I said, the network are now sending me to Kabul. And it was 2007, and it was the height of the terrorist attacks across Afghanistan. The Taliban had regrouped, and I wanted to go to Afghanistan to film the story. And my parents completely flipped out. They freaked out.
Yeah.
And they said, "You are not leaving Delhi. You stay right there." And my mum and dad jumped on a plane, turned up in Delhi. And I said, "Well, I'm going." And they came with me. So that was the
Wow.
first time my mother had returned in 20 something years to the country, after not seeing her family. And my father they realized very quickly that no one had sent me. No network had sent me. It was me, sort of with this camera. So my father became my producer, my fixer, my security, my translator. He became everything in this 3-week trip that we did to Afghanistan. And that became my big break. When I went back to Australia, I said, "Hey, I just spent my holidays in Kabul and India." And they freaked out. They were like, "Oh my God, there was no insurance. You went into a war zone. No one commissioned this. We don't want these stories." And I said, "Well, I have these tapes. You should look through them." And they looked through the India piece and they loved the piece. And they said, "Okay, we're going to run this." And they looked through the Afghan material and they said it was extraordinary. And we produced the piece together, half-an-hour documentaries for both. And it was the highest rating show of the year. And they sold it on. They said to me, "We're not giving you a penny for this." And I said, "Sure, don't worry about it. I just want my material on air." And they sold it on, and it was sort of sold internationally. And they gave me a third of the on sales, which I used then to travel to other parts until they properly hired me, and I became part of the furniture.
Ah, has your life ever been in danger over the course of all these adventures?
Yeah, I mean, I've like I said, I've covered extensively the war in Afghanistan, the uprisings in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine. I've traveled in and out of Ukraine as the war has escalated over the course of the last few years. I've been in and out of the war against ISIS in Iraq. So, I've been on the front lines. I've seen what war and conflict does to people and the displacement of people. And I've done work in Pakistan. I've done documentaries and films in India, for example, many documentaries out of Afghanistan as well. So my bread and butter began in the region, in India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, but then it sort of expanded to across the globe.
Um, when was the last time you were in Pakistan?
Pakistan now, probably about 7 years ago now,
Okay.
and actually, again, the Pakistani government have reached out. They've offered me visas to go to the country. They want to know when I'm coming. So, despite the criticism, despite the sort of fact that I'm fully aware and they know I'm aware, because of my understanding of the region, because of my passion for the region, they know that I know the story, and yet they say, "Come, we'll take you, we'll show you, we'll give you a briefing. Come to Pakistan." So in the next few weeks, once I've gone back to London, I'll probably be heading back to Pakistan.
Okay. We invite you to India as well. Would love to take you around.
I would love to come to India as well, and again, I think it's so important in journalism that you don't tell one side of the story. That I'll travel to Pakistan. I'll hopefully be able to come to India and get access to India, to Indian officials, and be able to see for myself the situation.
Yalda, you're of Afghan origin. You grew up in Australia. You're currently working in the UK. I think that you're a very strong neutral in this whole situation, especially considering all your work as a journalist. Um, what do you see as the key differences between the two countries?
I have been inside Deobandi madrasas in Karachi. I have spent time with the most extreme forms of these groups, where they, in seminaries, in madrasas, where there, I have seen with my own eyes the indoctrination of young people and the justification of how they view the world and how they prosecute, what they're doing, in terms of creating these hardliners in their country. And I put to one of the retired Pakistani generals I interviewed. He said to me, come here, come and see for yourself. Come and see our country. There is no Jaish-e-Mohammed. There is no Lashkar-e-Taiba. And I said, look, in Bahawalpur, the leader of Jaish-e-Mohammed, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, whose core idea and the mindset is, for them to take Kashmir back. They see that as their core fight. He, the founder, Masood Azhar, said 10 members of my family have been killed. He himself said it. So young people who were taught in those madrasas say that the madrasas were cleared because we had intelligence that India was going to launch strikes on us. Where did they get the intelligence? Why? So that is what, to the detriment of the Pakistani people, the ISI has decided it wants as its policy. Not only does it have nuclear weapons, but it also has decided that it wants to back and fund these terrorist groups. These two things don't mix well together. And this is a very different offering from what India is and what India has become. And we spoke a little bit earlier on the podcast about the talent that India is exporting to the world, what it is creating for itself domestically, and the offering of the two nations is incredibly different. And Washington has understood India's role in terms of its rivalry with China. And therefore, they have developed this extraordinary partnership, bipartisan partnership over the course of the last 25 years, as India has emerged as not just a regional but a global player. And so I think it's important that Western capitalists understand, where terrorism is bred from, why that's an issue, why it can become, an issue for the streets of London and New York, if people don't fully grasp that it isn't just held and confined to the region, to Afghanistan. I mean, right now, the relationship between the Pakistani government, the ISI, and the Afghan Taliban, which they, nurtured and help grow and regroup and fund, and brought their fighters to have bases in Pakistan and gave them space in their hospitals. And when the Afghan Taliban took over Afghanistan again, and NATO forces, the Americans, had to leave and withdraw, we saw the ISI chief drinking tea while Western capitals were in despair and trying to take their civilians out, trying to take their embassy staff out. 13 American servicemen and women were killed in a blast by ISK in outside of Kabul airport. The ISI chief was drinking tea at the Serena Hotel in Kabul and celebrating their win. And yet these are things, whether it's Osama bin Laden, whether it's the clear acceptance that our boys are back in town, is blatantly there, and yet there is no accountability.
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to say is that the root cause of especially most of our conflicts in the subcontinent is this element of terrorism, which is state sponsored, especially in Pakistan. I was going to ask you if the world really cares about what's happening. It's a very direct, raw question to you. And if they don't, then how do we make them care about it? Is another additional question. And another additional question is if the world is aware about everything that's happening in Balochistan, because in India, the news is telling us that we're at the brink of seeing the birth of a new country in the form of Balochistan. So I would love for you to answer all these three questions.
In terms of does the West care? Unfortunately, I don't think they care. I think that, when we see a headline, 26 tourists killed, I think they care. But I think they put it to one side and say this is an issue in the region and that's what it is and it's terrible and everybody moves on. And we react in our newsrooms to the kind of news that our audiences want to hear. But also, I think we have a responsibility, and I often do stories around Sudan. We have a brilliant correspondent who goes in and out of Sudan. Again, another forgotten story, forgotten war. We try and cover the situation in Yemen. We try and cover, to the extent that we can, what's happening on the ground in Gaza. And we have teams in India who cover things like the Pahalgam attack. So we try and bring that to the attention. But in terms of Baluchistan, one of the things that Pakistani officials always talk about is the fact that India backs and funds. When you throw the terrorism thing at them, they will say India backs and funds the Baluch Liberation Army, and they have their own proxies and they use it against us as a state. I don't know to what extent Baluchistan is ready to become a state. I think that Pakistan wouldn't allow that, and I don't know, again, whether it's at the cusp of that. I think they have their issues there, and Pakistan points the finger of blame on India for giving the Baluch Liberation Army the means and the tools and backing and funding them, and they say, well, they do that, so therefore we do this. And I don't know to what extent. I don't know if it's accurate to say they're on the cusp of having their own state. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I have had, quite interesting positive reaction and response from the Pakistanis as well, because you have to understand that the citizens of Pakistan, outside of the army, the defense, the military, are also fed up that this is a policy of the state. Even those people who are patriotic and even those people who try to flood the zone and say, of social media that they want to defend their country, and of course they do. But at the same time, I think they grasp the fact that if India knows where Masood Azhar is, if India knows exactly where these camps are, why doesn't Pakistan know? And I think that is a question that I put to these groups as well. These leaders that I've interviewed. If the Financial Action Task Force, which is a body that traces and tracks state sponsoring of terrorism, said to Pakistan, "You're on a grey list. You need to crack down. You need to find out where the mastermind of the Mumbai attacks are." And suddenly he goes from being dead to being arrested. That in itself, tells you everything. And I think the Pakistani people are fed up with it, and they do want to see fundamental change. But I am not sure what kind of hurry the ISI is to change its tact and what they use as a form of terrorism. Western journalists have been driven out of Pakistan. Declan Walsh, who worked for the New York Times, lived in Pakistan for years. He did a number of stories about the ISI's involvement with these terror groups, and he was driven out of Pakistan. And I think these sorts of stories aren't necessarily properly highlighted in India.
Yeah, I mean, the perspective of India here is that we are tired of everything that the ISI is doing. Like, if every content creator in India who's covering geopolitical issues knows these truths, how does the average Pakistani not know these truths? That's the question. And we're hoping that this whole chapter in our history has taken out the truth to the world. But speaking about history, the other thing I've wanted to ask you on a personal level is how you've covered the Israel-Gaza issue. You've been to Ukraine yourself. You've been a part of this India-Pakistan conflict now. I know it's a bit of a direct question, but in your eyes, do you feel that we are on the brink of some kind of global conflict right now this year? Because when World War II was building up, we didn't know that it was a world war that was building up. And I use the term world war very, very cautiously, but just on a very human level, it's starting to seem like that from a global perspective. There's way too many conflicts in the world. Like, I don't remember the last decade being like this, but ever since 2020, I think it's a different
Yeah,
time.
I think also our access to information has accelerated, and people who understand history won't say this is an unprecedented moment in history, because there is always something that triggers something bigger. And I think what was worrying about the India-Pakistan situation was that miscalculations lead to escalations, which can lead to all-out war. And the danger was two nuclear armed states. And that's why the world should have been sitting up and worried and paying attention and saying, we don't want this to escalate, because a nuclear war between two rivals is not just dangerous for the two rivals, it's dangerous for the entire world. The situation for Ukraine and Russia, we saw how easily and quickly that was triggered, although it built up over a number of years, from the annexation of Crimea, the protests we saw in Maidan, the shifting of governments in Ukraine, and then obviously Vladimir Putin denying that he was going to actually invade Ukraine proper, and that's what he's done, and he's annexed a lot of land. But there is also moments, I think, of hope. Yes, I think you're right. And one sort of miscalculation, misunderstanding can lead to escalation. And we are already seeing all sorts of cold wars simmering in different parts of the world, which can lead to, all out global war. To think that an assassination somewhere could have led to a global war. Um, Anything can happen, and anything can then trigger an all-out war. But I do think that I've been on this trip following Donald Trump from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to Doha, and then we've been trailing his trip as well to Abu Dhabi. What happened in Riyadh with Ahmed al-Sharaa, the now interim leader of Syria? He was a hardened jihadi. He was an al-Qaeda militant who spent time in one of the harshest American prisons, Abu Ghraib, in Iraq, where, there is no doubt that he has American blood on his hands. And yet he went back to Syria and formed this rebel group that then ended up toppling the Assad regime. And there is even reports that the Trump administration considered for a short period of time to assassinate him, because he's this rebel leader who was taking over, these militants were taking over Syria. And yet on Tuesday, we saw Donald Trump say that he was going to lift sanctions on Syria. On Wednesday, he spent 30 minutes with Ahmed al-Sharaa. And after that meeting, he described him as a tough guy with a tough past, an attractive guy, someone that the United States was willing to work with and deal with. This is geopolitics. This is the nature of the world. The Iranians who for the longest time have had proxies that have operated in the Middle East, that have launched direct attacks on American bases, American embassies, American infrastructure. Now America is sitting with them and coming up with a nuclear deal. And so I did an exclusive interview with Hamas yesterday, where they said, yes, we're in direct talks. Hamas, responsible for October 7 and killing of, Israeli hostages and Israeli citizens inside Israel, which for the United States was an unforgivable move. And we've seen what's happened in Gaza since 60,000 people have been killed as a result. And I did this interview with Hamas yesterday at the hands, by the way, of Israel. Israeli airstrikes have killed these 60,000 people. But I put to the Hamas leader that you triggered this by launching October 7 and you brought this hellfire on your own people. And he said to me, we are in direct talks with the United States. So what I'm trying to say is that the nature of the world, whilst it feels scary and stressful, while the information we're getting on a daily basis is that things are triggering everywhere, and we saw another flashpoint in India and Pakistan, how dangerous that was, there is also things happening behind the scenes where negotiations are taking place to diffuse situations and to bring people out from the cold. But this idea that never again, a Holocaust will never happen again, a World War I or II will never happen again, I think is false. And I think people who understand history know that we are on the cusp of something incredibly dangerous, and it can be triggered by a miscalculation an escalation that can lead to an all-out war. But I'm also heartened by what I'm seeing in different parts of the world in terms of negotiations and deals to try and diffuse situations.
Discomforting answer. Um, we're almost at the end of this podcast. What are your ending notes?
I think that India is at at a different point in where it is in terms of where its standing is in the global community, and it is offering something very different to Pakistan. And so I'm often encouraged. I come to India once a year, and I am encouraged by what I see in India, the development, the pace at which it's going. And like all democracies, it has its problems. But I am encouraged by the development, the technology, the entrepreneurship, the enterprising nature of India, the startups that we're seeing, the nature of the startups, the conversations that are being had in India. It is quite extraordinary, I think, where India is today and the growing middle class.
Uh, just want to say thank you at the end of this conversation. I began with a thank you on behalf of my country because we love you, Yalda Hakim. But at the end of the conversation, again, I just want to express my gratitude for your time. This was a learning for me as well. And I'm hoping to help solve that problem statement that you've put forth. So, very grateful to you and hope to take you around for some great Indian food on your next visit to Mumbai or Delhi or wherever.
Thank you so much, Ranveer. Really great to be on your podcast, and you're doing great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yalda. Wish you more success in everything that you're pursuing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was the episode for today, ladies and gentlemen. Our intention as media professionals from India is to put India's voice out there for the globe. But if you are a viewer from outside India, please send in your feedback. Want to create a lot more content for you. Want India's perspective out there on a global level. We're living in extremely complex, geopolitically fueled times. I know that this is not my last interaction with Yalda Hakim. So tell us what you thought about this episode. Tell us what you'd like for us to discuss the next time around. And until next time, from Ranveer and the team, thank you for listening in. TRS will be back.